Welcome to Recharge, real stories, real strategies, real estate. I am your host, Ashley Dane with RE/MAX of Michigan. And, today, most people are familiar with Michigan Realtors from a statewide industry level, a highly respected board of directors, classic events, maybe legal resources or the occasional call to action. But behind the scenes, there is a full-time advocacy operation shaping the rules of the industry in the state. Now, Rob Campau has had a front row seat to Michigan real estate for decades. Today, we're going to ask him what agents need to understand about the forces shaping their business. So, Rob, welcome to Recharge.
Well, thank you, Ashley. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. Honestly, I'm very excited for this conversation. I've had you as, in my heart and in hopes that we would be able to have these conversations here.
Wow,
So this
I
is
hope
great.
I live up to that.
Of course. Now, okay, I remember Rob from Michigan Realtors 20 years ago when I got into the industry myself. So how long have you been with the association?
30 years with the association.
That's
actually
incredible.
plus, I think. It's a long time. Better part of my career. I didn't necessarily know that when I started. Previous to that, I graduated, went into advertising. I worked up to the Chrysler account for a while, and we were doing an ad with the then chairman, Lee Iacocca. And he was yelling at a bunch of fake board members in a fake boardroom about how America deserves better. And I thought America really does deserve better than me doing this.
Yes.
It was around 1990. There was a change in administration in Michigan, and I thought I wanted to be a part of that in terms of making Michigan more competitive. I was living in Detroit at the time. And I came back. I kind of took a not great job as actually an internship in a state rep's office. Worked there for 3 or 4 years, went to Michigan Manufacturers Association for a year lobbying for them, and then the opportunity arose at Michigan Realtors. So that's the full background.
Over the course of 30 years, obviously you have developed a true passion for this. At what point did housing become an addiction?
Yeah. I've always, if you buy into the American dream, and I think it's still very much worth buying into, although more expensive than it used to be, arguably, the home ownership is the basis of everything. That's when you become a full functioning member of society with a stake in the game to make the great experiment that is the U.S. function. And to me, that's very worthwhile. The auto industry is buy American and things of that nature. That meant a lot, but it doesn't nearly mean as much as I think every individual philosophically committing to making this work is the basis of why we're still here as a country at 250, despite all kinds of presidents that people don't appreciate or haven't been great, and all kinds of missteps along the way.
Yeah. Okay. So now over the course of your career, are there any highlights? Were there any moments where it was just, you step back and you're like, wow, this work really mattered?
You have to get used to the idea when you're working with legislation that you're expecting a society to conform to whatever new law or lack of law there is put on the books. And that's a transition I think everybody who works in government kind of has to go through. And I think sometimes that power goes to people's heads. And I think then some people recognize, and this is going to be a recurring theme with me, the fiduciary that involves without being intimidated by it. So to that end, I think there are things that matter more to me personally. And I can't tell you what's had the most impact, quote unquote, on the state. I can tell you one of the first things I worked on that was a nice transition, really, and part of the reason I think I got the job going from manufacturers to realtors was there was legislation to try to reuse brownfields and infill in the city. The city of Detroit means a lot to me. Growing up, a lot of family history and things of that nature. But I really deeply felt that, Chicago was so above and beyond in the late 80s, early 90s. Boston was doing really well, San Francisco and Detroit. We kept talking about how it was going to be great, but it was just not getting off the ground. And a big part of it that we didn't talk about, it was nobody in their right mind would invest in a contaminated property at the time. So there was a lot of gas stations, what they used to call Leaking Underground Storage Tank Act and various other things that we worked on. But the idea was to pass legislation that would do a baseline environmental assessment of where the property was, and then not have, I think, very well-intended laws on the books that if you touched a chain of ownership in a property, you were fully responsible for whatever went on there for the previous 100 years.
That's problematic.
Well, it was. There are times when good intentions meet marketplace, and marketplace will dictate that nobody in the right mind would take over a property that had been an auto plant or a gas station or a chemical manufacturing or, a paint company, and instantly become liable for whatever that company had done. It was meant to get to the original actors, but if, let's say, Packard had been out of business for a few years, you weren't getting any money for remediation on that. So long story short, it meant a lot to me. It was probably, I remember it most accurately because it was a first bill situation that I did work on in both capacities. And I was really proud when that passed. As always, there were so many details. It didn't work out exactly as planned, but the spirit of it really was very helpful in taking over. There was also since there's been a lot of tax stuff and a lot of taxes that have come and gone. In most instances, very grateful that they left because we're spearheading the change.
Yep.
But tax policy is always one of those areas that literally affects everyone.
It's great to hear, not only do you have a job that can impact so many people, like tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people across the state of Michigan, but it's personal to you.
Very. Yeah. Well, I feel a responsibility. And frankly, with term limits, there's a lot more responsibility placed on, whatever you want to call it, the swamp or the people in positions where my career is going to outlast the average state rep or state senator. Yeah. And indeed has, no matter how good or bad they were. Some instances, you're happy, some instances you're sad, but it comes down to there is a responsibility here. And I went to law school in Lights and got my law degree. And, I just feel it's important to be a responsible citizen in any capacity. Whatever you do, you should do it well. You should do it with care, and you should take care of people, and you should do it with a sense of full responsibility. So I think if I've brought anything to this position as executive, it's just continuing with that ethic.
That's fantastic. Now, you have led Michigan Realtors through so many sort of historic moments. We've got the Great Recession, we have COVID, market shifts, we have this new post-settlement era. From your perspective, what period changed the industry the most?
It's been a continual evolution in real estate. I think I don't think it's recency effect. I think in terms of changing the industry specifically, we're going through the biggest change right now, post-settlement, the cultural change at NAR and the managerial change at NAR. They're the ones who have, I would say, responsibility and control for the word realtor. I mean, that goes to the very heart of who we're all working for here and what we're all trying to do. It's throughout all the other ones, of course. I mean, there were business taxes that could have been devastating. There were, it's all the things that don't happen, really, that are probably as or more important than the things that have happened.
Yes.
But I think this era is going to be the one that's going to see the most change. A little story I tell when I started at the Realtors, I went to, I think it was Kalamazoo. There was a lecture being done before one of the local associations, and I was in the audience because I was going to speak next. And they were talking about the Lions Over the Hill speech, the Bill Chi thing, about how, the internet's coming and it's going to eat us. And we're going to go the way of, at the time, travel agents. I think they would have ended booksellers. I don't think Amazon had done quite what it had done at the time. And I'm sitting there thinking, man, I took this job. It's a good thing my resume's updated, but I can't believe I thought manufacturing was going to experience some difficulties in the 90s and aughts, but boy, it really looks like real estate's going, this whole thing is sinking. So, and indeed, I've worked with a lot of people who have jumped on the lifeboats a little early.
Yes. I mean, we hear that today in 2026. And what was this approximately, 1990s?
94.
Yeah. Okay.
93. Yeah, 94. So, yeah, I mean, it's never changed. And I think there are some bases, and I don't know if you've got other questions about, we'll get there later, but I think that's one of the facts that makes me comfortable, that the hyperlocality of the work that realtors do, the expertise and the fiduciary that realtors have are the reason we're going to continue to be around.
Yeah.
Whatever's going on in terms of access to information and data, and who gets control of who's going to know when somebody needs to change an air filter in their air conditioner, before somebody else does. I think that's really, the heart of it is working with people and helping them achieve their dreams and work out a deal where somebody's getting the proper equity as they're exiting home ownership or that particular home ownership, and for somebody who's coming in. So anyway, it's been a long time. Now, COVID was absolutely the worst time. I think that was we had a governor who very much was very careful, shall we say. We were, it was probably the ugliest chapter. I'm going to go over details to make people remember.
Yes.
But that was the hardest, because it really felt like we were letting membership down. We got a lot of pretty vicious calls. I mean, when realtors really, they work for the people and they're very kind 90% of the time.
Being told you're non-essential doesn't often make people feel great.
Yeah, it seems insulting, I'll agree.
Yes.
Plus the not being able to actually make a living during that time.
Yes.
So, we were working, I kept going into the office and watering the plants and making myself a pot of coffee, and just sitting there and taking the calls. But what we decided with senior staff was every call that came in, no matter how rude, no matter how epithet-laden the message or the call might be, we're calling everybody back because there was just so much frustration. And of course, I did. That was, I think, the only time I kind of got out front. I'm not an executive who... I haven't been on my own Facebook account in 20 odd years, which is embarrassing. My son just got on it because he's going to start looking for a job. And anyway, I'm not a social media guy. But that was the only time I did videos and sent them out to, I think, called membership. It's my hair, you couldn't get a haircut either. So it was all going to hell. And there were these poorly produced, bad angled, but every week I'd be like, okay, this is where we are. This is the contact we have with the governor's office. This is who we're talking to. We've been assured we'll be the first indoor activity allowed. And indeed we were. It just took a while. That was the hardest. If that was, I don't think that was the actual question, but that was the hardest time. But in terms of the most change, I think we're going through it today.
Yes. How would you describe what Michigan Realtors is to a newly licensed real estate agent? What's the mission?
It is funny. And not only newly, but it's very clear from the very beginning that we have a very committed group of experienced real estate professionals who understand what we do.
Yes.
We've got, let's call that 20 to 30%. We've got 20 to 30% that are vaguely aware that we're necessary. And maybe 30 to 40%, I don't know, I'm estimating here, really have no idea, resentful of the idea that they have to pay dues to anybody. Don't even know who we are, never heard of us, even though we send weekly emails with 60% open rates, but that's fine. Or biweekly, actually. We don't overdo it like NAR has in the past. But anyway, our mission statement is simply that we provide, and I'm paraphrasing now, that we work for the real estate industry as advocates in the legislature and the courts, that we are responsible for all tracking and approval of continuing education, and that we provide networking and educational events to increase people's professionalism and understanding of the industry. And I think there's a flow to people's understanding of the industry anyway. I think everybody takes the test, they get their license. Now what? It doesn't feel like you've talked to anybody. It doesn't feel like you have any, you could talk about, and you are far better at RE/MAX than I will ever be in terms of teaching people how to be a salesperson. But it doesn't mean that they have an understanding of the world they're living in, certainly the statutory structure they're living in. And most of all, I think the only frustrating thing to staff is they don't understand the blessings of over 100 years of work that has put together this structure that allows everybody to make a living and do this work.
Yes.
It's taken for granted. It's treated like
it is taken for granted. And I truly think that it's only when people start calling into question important aspects that influence the structure that we enjoy and that consumers benefit from, that's when you step back and be like, yes, it's been 100 years of realtors saying, let's make this industry possible for the people that we serve.
Indeed. I guess for times like these, I'm glad it's called into question again. I think, with the Sitzer case, the realtors themselves were faced with the idea of what is the value and how do we explain our value to the public, because everybody had taken it for granted to the point where that the public didn't understand what a realtor did or was necessary. And of course, there was this prediction that, all the headlines were, and I think some of the specific plaintiffs and some of the specific ideas were bad PR, behind it. But, that we're going to suddenly make it a lot cheaper to buy a home, quote unquote, because we're going to eliminate the realtors' fees or bring them down. And the fact of the matter is once realtors then had to sit down, and I think everybody had to work on a new sales pitch, which I'm sorry for that, but it ended up, I think, a really positive thing. If a study shows that actually commissions have gone up since buyer's agents have sat down and said, this is my value, and seller's agents have said, this is what we do for you, and broken it down into some step by step or some project by project.
Consumer awareness will never be a bad thing.
Correct. And so to that end, if it's our time in the spotlight, let us shine.
Yes.
And to that end, when it comes to what Michigan Realtors is, we provide at the most highly regulated level, both of scrutiny and of structure. We work on the laws and the statutes surrounding real estate ownership and real estate sales. And so every day we go to work, I'll tell you, tax policy is something that there's no morality associated with tax policy. It is what will get the least amount of complaint for the most amount of money for government. And so when it comes to why is this person tax this or not tax that, you can only really look at economic benefit or damage that is done by tax policy as it goes through. And so every day we go to work defending against increases in property taxes, increases in document fees, if you will, or the transfer tax, increases on sales tax on services. Then you can go into, various others. Then you can go into what we defend against in terms of advocacy, lawsuits. We're a regulated industry, the Consumer Protection Act and things of that nature, which are wonderful for those products that you buy, but for services and licensed industries, it's rather important that anybody who can second guess a real estate deal doesn't get trouble damages and their attorney's fees paid for by the realtor who may have done absolutely nothing wrong.
Yes.
Those are the sorts of things we go in every day. In the courts, we just won a case having to do with a three-way agreement that supports the long-time structure that government has acknowledged for over 100 years, which is we don't need people selling the Brooklyn Bridge, having no, the old Bugs Bunny cartoon where that always happened, or selling properties that they don't own, or all the nasty things that you can do when you make the single largest transaction that the average consumer makes. That if you're at all shady, that can really destroy somebody's life. They recognize that the best thing we could do is have competitors come together, have an accurate, what we now call a database, that helps banks and other financial institutions say with certainty what that property is worth, to the point where they can say, okay, we only need a comparatively to the world much smaller percentage down, and we will finance the rest. The rest, it's unheard of outside of the United States that you got 20% down or whatever, below that you might get, compared to, other nations where you've got to put in at least 50 or 80% because they don't have a functioning structure that is reliable in terms of what the real estate values are. What
happens behind the scenes when an issue becomes a priority, something pops up and it catches the attention of the Michigan Realtors? What's the process? What happens?
Well, obviously, if someone like you called, we would figure out what's going on. Which happens with fraud and other things that those are issues of the moment that we can bring to the attention of authorities, and we do so immediately. But in terms of the kinds of things that need to get considered for real policy at the legislative level, we're sensitive to that. I've got a board of directors that are both, in every sense, geographically, politically diverse. And they would be a touch point. Really, you don't have to have a board meeting to have somebody say, oh, we've got, I'm hearing they're considering this at the local level, and that's where a lot of it.
Yeah.
That's where the most things bubble up without us having some sort of forewarning.
Yeah.
All of a sudden there's a sign ordinance going in or something along those lines. But most importantly, for the purposes of the question, we have a public policy committee that, again, is geographically and politically diverse. And it's 26, 30 people. And they're appointed by leadership. And one of the things I'm proud of that we do at Michigan Realtors that isn't true of other associations is they actually gather 6 times a year. They come in, we review all legislation or potential legislation or things where there might need to be legislation and how we want to handle that. And they meet for 2 or 3 hours, generally, sometimes longer. And they consider and then come up with a position. As Brad and I and Brian have always said, we don't have a position unless the Michigan Realtors tells us we have a position. But that's where it's formed. It's formed by realtors. And we got some really great experience and thoughtful people who've worked at the local level and are in public policy. So that's a real prime slot. But again, the thing I'm proud of is they make the decision. We don't have a board that second guesses. We don't have 3 layers we don't have a particular player or, dare I say brokerage, but, or region or something that dominates the conversation to the point where the average realtor's voice is not heard. So, it's all volunteers. And again, our public policy decisions makes public policy decisions. Our RPAC makes the PAC decisions. Our convention task force, decides who's going to speak at conventions, which I'm famously horrible at trying to predict what realtors would appreciate in terms of speakers. And also the broker summit. We have a finance committee. And really I'm probably forgetting 1 or 2, but we don't have 1,000 committees to make people feel involved. We have committees that people actually are involved in actually making decisions. And it's worth their drive to Lansing to meet in person, which they do, to have conversations with their fellow realtors who, one of the greatest sources of emotional satisfaction, by the way, this is such a digression. One of the greatest emotional rewards of this job is seeing people, famously, an Ann Arbor City Council person was sitting on that at the same time that we had a guy from Marshall who was rather famously conservative, and to see them come together and respect each other's humanity and Americanness is something that I think, that wasn't a word, that is something that really inspires me to come to work every day. That America really needs this now, as people who do not agree in any way, shape, or form about the general scope of politics to come in, talk about some commonality and see the goodness in each other. I think that's a wonderful thing.
That is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, that was a hell of a digression. Sorry.
All right. So realtors have many opinions, and there's many things happening. There's things happening in the national stage. There's things happening at the statewide stage. There's things happening at the local stage. How would Michigan Realtors prioritize a response there?
Yeah, again, it's just all what the volunteers have to say. Yeah. There are times when I've read something or thought something was coming down the line that it looked really nasty, and the realtor's like, well, that's not a big deal. We're going to be just fine. And then there are times when there was some aspect of a deal or transaction that was being touched on legislatively that seemed relatively benign to me, but was huge. You hear various things. And go back to taxation for a minute, the pop-up tax. Thankfully, when Proposal A was originally introduced, I think it was a potential 6%. I didn't mean pop-up. I meant, in this case, transfer tax. It was going to be 6%. Well, it got lowered down to, depending how you look at it, 0.75 with 0.13 going to the counties. But the point is it ended up at under a single percentage. You look at the pop-up tax. When that was passed, it was a savior to ever-escalating property taxes in the state. Anytime the economy booms or inflation gets high, you've got people, quote unquote, frozen in, which was the whole point of Proposal A, was did not have grandma shoved out of her house before her time. I think it's just funny how things change in terms of markets and demographics. We got a lot more grandmas now living alone in a lot more houses, so to speak, and grandpas too, don't get me wrong. And so, how you handle that and the escalating, and then when you added in the low interest rates that were offered at one point that everybody refinanced for. You've got a hell of a financial conundrum in terms of people not being able to, even if said, Grandma, I got to stop relying on this one. But if Grandma wanted to move to something smaller, it would cost her a lot more money if she, unless she had enough money to,
even if she's able to go into the new house without a mortgage,
the taxes
will come.
Potentially. Yeah. So, you've got to wait for those things to kind of shake out, and you can violently change policy, and other states have, but the more you manipulate the market, the more those sorts of perfect storms can happen. And that's one of the things you've got to look long-term and try to avoid, so you don't over-lobby to take care of today's problem to create more problems tomorrow.
Yes. What do you wish more members understood about advocacy?
That their voice counts more than they think it does.
Okay.
If expressed rationally and thoughtfully.
Okay.
And that subject matter expertise trumps all in public policy.
Yeah.
So, like I talked about the COVID days when we took the phone calls and made sure to call everybody back or whatever, it's easy, especially in this day and age when people are more isolated than ever, to rant. And when they, having worked in a state legislator's office, the rather famous 3-page, no paragraphs or indentations, no punctuation, all caps letter.
Yes.
It's not something that's going to, there might be a real gem in there, but you're not going to find it as a staffer trying to talk to the state representative about this, what this person is upset about. And I feel like that was the old days when people typed. Things have switched around, but things haven't changed. If you send a flame, you're not going to have an intellectually satisfying response. If you feel better and that's part of your therapy, well then, okay, that's, I'm sure every office kind of understands that. But if you knew that your subject matter expertise in an area or that your personal experiences had as much effect as they did when you talked to a state rep or a senator or your city council person or a trustee at the township level or your association, whether it be local, state, or national, that if you can approach something and talk about it a little dispassionately, but talk about why something is a bad policy, that gets so much more attention than you think it does. And it really rises to the top in terms of people's concerns.
That's a silver lining. I like that.
Go team.
So we just did an episode about Michigan property taxes, and we were going through the structure and how it was created and maybe where we're at, a few decades later and some of the impacts there. But as soon as we released the podcast, I think it was the day that we released the property taxes podcast, then we saw some news headlines that we've finally had some major movements and major conversation. Can you tell me a little bit about what's happening in the legislature right now with Michigan property tax?
Well, I sure could have 10 years ago because I would have been in charge of it. But Brad Word's your guy for that. What I would tell you is we've been involved in all those conversations from the very beginning with every caucus in both the Senate and the House, and certainly with the governor's office in terms of what housing policy makes sense. And I think Brad's brought a lot of expertise to it. You've got to work with not only what's possible between Democrats and Republicans, which doesn't leave a lot of wiggle room, but then again, what isn't some immediate fix-it situation that causes problems down the line. So we've tried to be the voice of reason. And again, Brad does a great job at that. What I can tell you is there is a definite hunger to make housing more affordable that has affected tax policy. And of course, how many homes we can get building much sooner and later. And I think you mentioned you had Bob Filka on at one point, so we'll leave that to the home builders. What I can tell you is that what we've tried to guard against is any policy that would manipulate the market, such as throwing money at it. I don't think that would go over in the Republican caucus, particularly in the House anyway. But throwing money at something just increases. If everybody has more money to buy a house, then housing becomes more unaffordable. So that's just how economies work. I think we've looked at that quite well. I think we tried to be very careful in discussions about how much money you're talking about, what percentage of the budget. I think there's a $5 million price tag on one of the policies that, $5 billion. That's out of 80 plus billion in the state budget overall. That's a pretty big chunk. Where's that revenue going to come from?
Yes.
Now, there are those who argue that it wasn't an $80 billion budget 5 years ago. It was something less than that. I'll leave that to those people who would argue that point. But without getting myself into too much trouble, what I can tell you is we've been involved from the beginning, working with the home builders. There is this idea that Our state needs to be more open to smaller lot sizes in some areas. That's led to, of course, we are blessed with township government here and a lot of local control, which I think local government can be best government. That's great. But I think it touches on those issues where every township wants to have an industrial area, residential area, shopping area, and rural area. And when you break it up into, I don't know how many townships there are. I know it's hundreds, and 83 counties. I know that for sure. There are some things that, or maybe just something, a little larger view of the world would be a good thing. I mean, a lot of townships welcome the heck out of development until it's changed enough that it's unpopular, and then it's shut it down, and now you got to push it to the next highway exit. Yeah. And so that hilariously at the turn of the century, this century when I was working, was the big thing. You may recall one of the first things Governor Granholm did when she came in, and she got some old lions together, particularly Governor Milken, whom I respected greatly, to say that this place is going to get paved over by 2025 at this rate of development, and we've got to do something to stop urban sprawl. Well, it's 2026 that we're not paved over, I'm happy to say. But we do have a situation now where I think some of the policies that were put in place and some of the natural defense mechanisms that have been used, such as very large lot sizes and things of that nature, have pushed us into a situation where more housing would be very appropriate for especially first-time home buyers who then get in the market, my aforementioned, buy into society, buy into America, buy into the American dream, and get on that ladder. So we're paying for that now a little bit, in my personal opinion. And I think that these packages, I think nothing passes this legislature unless it's pretty special in terms of the partisan wrangling that's been going on.
Now, for our agents that may not have read the headlines or they haven't heard what the conversation is, what are the essential changes to the property tax structure?
Well, I think right now they've got a thing where there's no pop-up tax in it, which, the only thing from our perspective that we think needs to be taken into consideration is that if you bought your home in 2000 and I bought mine in 2024, mine already popped up. So now 2 years later in 2026, we pass a law that says there will never be a pop-up tax. And I'm sorry, maybe I should explain. Pop-up being that the home stays at, 3% or 5% of the rate of inflation, or the rate of inflation, whichever is less, is only as much as your property tax can go up, according to Proposal A. But when the home sells, that delta
comes back to market rate.
That gap goes back to market rate. So your home would sell for more than mine would because you had less tax burden on it as established in the year of your purchase.
You have a 100-year-old farmhouse, and now we've got a real conversation happening.
So, considering Proposal A was in the early 90s. Yes. So I think that's the sort of thing that's going to get hashed out. I give my personal opinions, but you know what? I'm here as CEO of Michigan REALTORS, so I won't go too far into it. But I would just say I think there's more consideration, and I think there's going to be a lot more debate on both sides about not only holes in the budget or whatever that might look like, but tax policy in general, in terms of its immediately beneficial effects, and then perhaps less so in the long term.
Well, I mean, I think the positive thing is that this is the first very strong indicator that I've seen that the legislature is paying attention, that there is a priority, that they do want to help solve for an outcome of property tax destruction.
Yes, it's nice to see that because as of, I don't know, even 10 years ago, it would have been, property values have risen. So let's let's really hammer the real estate industry. And we've been playing defense for a long time. So it's nice to have this respite. I'm not going to get used to it because I think they're going to go on to, and bless them. That's what politicians or government officials have to, is address the next crisis. Usually by the time something goes through to address it, it's already starting to solve itself. But that said, I do think that we're at a temporary, wonderful spot where affordable home ownership is in the spotlight, and we're going to continue to do all we can to make sure that we have sensible policies that will really help keep housing affordable and the American experiment going forward.
Well, it's really interesting because in so many of these industry conversations that we've been having, affordability keeps coming back to the forefront because it is such a pain point. Can you identify what you would say are some of the contributing factors in Michigan? What are the challenges in Michigan that is making housing feel a little bit unattainable?
Well, I mean, let's go back to that pop-up situation. Let's go back to you're really, whatever age you are, if you're at a 2.9% interest rate, you haven't paid off your mortgage yet because you're making money every time the inflation's over 3, so to speak. I mean, not a great place to park money when you could be making it on the market, et cetera. I mean, certainly there's that argument, but you're not going to give away money by trying to move, even if downsizing made some sense. So I think really that's it. We got a situation of population bulges. I mean, I happen to be theoretically X generation. People a year older than me always act like I'm lording it over them or I'm being arrogant, but they say the X generation started in 65 and that's me. But we're the trough between two huge peaks, which is the boomers and those younger than there's like 3.
Yes.
I used to know the name for all the generations younger than I, but they keep coming up with more. But anything from millennials to Gen Z and all that stuff. So they are ready to buy. I mean, and again, everybody's waiting longer to have kids. Everybody's waiting longer to get married or anyway cohabitate. When you put all these factors together, we're at a really unique situation in the market right now. We got a lot of demand from people who, with inflation, a lot of other factors are not as much in a position to buy into what is now far more expensive housing. And, I mean, the internet's your friend when you want to look at inflation rates and what a dollar was worth in 1990. I mean, heck, even early 2000s compared to what it is today. I don't know that salaries and all have risen to the point where they're able to take inflation into account, let alone a lot of the building codes and a lot of the bigger lot sizes and all the demand, all the regulations that have been put on housing in not only just Michigan, but across the nation that make housing far more expensive. Now, is it good to have more fireproof homes that are more energy efficient and all? Those are great public goods, but if you can't afford a house to get into it, I think there's some other societal detriments that are starting to outweigh the positives in having houses that have to look like they're from Stamford, Connecticut in the 50s with massive lot sizes and a certain number of bedrooms and square foot and walkways and things that are wide enough.
Now, that sort of leans into Michigan Realtors initiatives and work with the Housing Readiness package. For those that aren't familiar with it, what is the Housing Readiness? What do we need to know about this?
Go to our website as part one. But what you need to do is that it's a chance to say, okay, I think local government has to be a lot more serious about the regulations they are putting on homeownership in their areas to preserve the community character, and that the allowance for, in some cases, the more considered allowance for duplexes or smaller lot sizes or multi-unit housing to get condominiums is a societal good, and it's something that we need to look at in there. I think there's a natural blowback from local governments that feel there's a lot of hyperbole out there that if a house burns down, this means you're going to be able to put a trailer park there, in the middle of Grosse Pointe or whatever. And bless them, I appreciate the concerns and the way that that's being read, but that's not what's in the actual legislation. Legislation asks local governments to not use the easiest, the biggest stick to have broad policies that are becoming counterproductive to, as they say, where the kid's going to live. I mean, if you want your kids nearby, do you want to be able to afford a house nearby? That's one of the things that's sort of allowed through this package. And with that, I will leave the details to, again, you should have Brad Ward on. He's excellent. He's funnier than I am too.
All right. We'll get him booked.
Yeah, right.
But if there is positive change, if ADUs become more...
Well, using an acronym, tell me what that means.
Accessory dwelling unit, right?
There you go.
Yes.
That's right.
So you can have your kids in the backyard in a mini house.
Yes,
you can all call it all good.
Right. Because that's where they want to be, right next to their parents.
Right. Well, if it's all they can afford, my gosh, in the basement or put them in a shed, I don't know.
I'm all for the carriage house, 100%. Go ahead.
Yes. But if this becomes more open in communities, if this type of development can take place, all variety of these items with if parking gets changed. How does that show up in the market?
Well, I mean, again, I think there's just some requirements, some square footage requirements and some lot size requirements and things of that nature that just make, a lot of the valuation occurs by square foot. And and that's just how that's done. Yeah. But in terms of, the parking and everything else, I mean, these are all added costs that go into building these things profitable or not profitable. And at some point along the lines, and again, you've had Bob on, I haven't seen the whole episode, I confess. But
Don't tell Bob that.
He's not watching this one, so I'm not worried. But anyway, or listening. But going back to it, the more regulation you add onto a home with the best of intentions in terms of making sure that everybody that you can have, if there are 5 people in there, all 5 can park or whatever it might be, yes. Or more. Or the super wide streets so that 3 snowplows can pass at once, go in different directions. That sorts of things, all that concrete and all those things add to the cost of housing to the point where you've got to have something bigger and more elaborate to have a profit margin. And we are still a free society where people build for money.
Yes,
not because the government demands that they do brutalist structures that everybody lives in a single apartment in a concrete structure because the government dictated that's where they go. That's not what we do here.
Business owners are entrepreneurs. If they have an opportunity to make money, they may take the opportunity to make money.
Yep.
As it turns out.
Thank you for making the point, Ashley. You should have just done that to start with.
All right. So Michigan Realtors has been talking about the Consumer Protection Act. At a 10,000-foot level, what's the elevator pitch on explaining what this is and why it matters to real estate practitioners?
Well, as a regulated industry and in a licensed industry, we are in a position where people can bring complaints both in the courts and to the regulator and say that this person has not observed their fiduciary. This is different than the Consumer Protection Act when you're talking about a product per se. If you, under the Consumer Protection Act right now, licensed industries are dealt with as per their license and through the courts. Through Consumer Protection Act, you get treble damages. That's 3 times whatever the damage was, perceived damage was, whatever you can try to prove in court, and all attorneys' fees paid. And I don't know if you've driven down a highway lately in Michigan, but you'll see that there are lots of attorneys who are really interested in having fees paid, even though they don't charge you a thing, of course, unless they win. God bless them. That sort of thing, you can always second guess a real estate deal. I could always made more. I paid too much. I paid too little, within margins, obviously. If something goes wrong with the house, you can always claim that it was an existing this or that. There are too many details surrounding home ownership and home sales to have a situation where you can have, even if it was $1,000 of damage or even $500 of damage, and someone wants to prove a point, and they are into the $30,000 in legal fees, that will become a chilling effect on business overall and transfer of homes, and that's not productive for Michigan. So anyway, that's it. For an average real estate licensee, if you're asking how important Consumer Protection Act protections are, if you want to go ahead and pay 3 times what a lawyer would charge to sue you, go right ahead.
There we go. Now, what legal resources or what resources does Michigan Realtors have for practitioners to take advantage of that are at their disposal?
I think if you look at the website, first of all, we are, I think, the home of license law and all things real estate in terms of the legal. We've worked really hard, and it's been a real priority for the board of directors and myself to make sure that we are properly putting the expertise of the 5 attorneys we have on staff and the CPA and others, that we are doing now videos because people don't want to read, and I appreciate that. And they got to be brief videos, by the way. I don't think anybody's listening to what I'm saying now, so I think I'm feeling really free because we are too far into this to have, unless they're in a car, there's not. But anyway, to make sure that we're putting really front and center our legal expertise. Brian and Becky are wonderful. I've heard from many brokerages that they get together with the latest video talking about any number of topical issues that we hear from our legal hotline, which is the other thing I'm going to talk about in a second. But anyway, that those right away are a framework for you can know what the rules are as you go forward in business. And I think particularly for brokers where it's harder and harder to get people's attention and keep people's attention, let alone realtors' attention. I should say real estate licensees, but I would assume realtors for most brokerages. And that these knowing the legal framework is something that you can't sit down in one go, that somebody needs to be the repository of how things are working, where the courts are, where the law is, what's going to get you in trouble, what's not going to get you in trouble. I think we are the non plus ultra of legal advice on that, and really, really proud of our team there. Going back to advocacy, of course, if you start working in real estate, you realize very quickly that local rules, local laws, state rules, state laws make all the difference in profitability. If nothing else, if you want to be self-serving. But in terms of the free transfer of property among citizens of the United States of America, there are 1,000 reasons to try to choke that to death or overregulate it, and they will start to recognize that they are working within a structure that is built on the shoulders of giants over 100 years. Sometimes they were right, sometimes they were really wrong, but we have a structure that works really well, and that is worth preserving, and they have to be vigilant about all things going on in advocacy. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, finally going in about professional development and education. Paying a fee to an association doesn't make you a professional. Paying attention to what's going on in those associations is what makes you a better professional. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of people who become really, really, the more you get involved in it, the more you see what matters, the more passionate you become about being a part of your community and part of this effort to keep home ownership at the center of the American experience.
Mm-hmm. It's true. It's true.
Sounded like wrap up, but it's not.
Yeah. All right. So having the opportunity to chat with you, there's so much that happens in the industry. I'm like, okay, I'm going to have Rob in a room. I can ask him some questions. It may be a little controversial, right? Okay. Some of these sensitive topics, but private listing networks, positive or negative?
Well, as you say, might be a bit controversial, and thank you.
The hot seat, Rob.
The hot seat is actually the courts right now. Yes. So I think I will do the famous attorneys over or avoidance of the issue by saying that those are being litigated right now. I will go on to say that there are a lot of different models being offered in real estate. And I think there are a lot of different opportunities for, I think if you really break it up into, and a colleague of mine talks about it, advertising and data are kind of the functions that things have evolved to over the years. I think as you put focus on one or the other, you're going to come up with different products. I think that it is important that we recognize, and again, this has been a theme of what you and I have been talking about, is that there has been an established structure that has served the consumer so well that it has been approved by both the courts and legislatures as saying that it's very important that you can bring, again, competitive real estate salespeople together in one place, know what they're talking about, have a great, an accurate database based on when information is put in and taken out. That is accurate enough that financial institutions can rely on those numbers and that real estate professionals can come together and know what they are talking about. Mm-hmm.
It's such a beautiful thing.
It is a beautiful thing. And I think really everything we're talking about is a riff on that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, are there other cocktails that you can make besides the classics, with a couple of different ingredients here and there? Well, sure. At some point, do they start to taste very bad? Well, possibly. Mm-hmm. We'll see what the courts decide on some of that stuff. Mm-hmm. I would say that the courts have been very active in real estate these years. And whether there is validity to some of the cases that I've seen or not, it doesn't always matter depending on the court that takes them up. But I think one thing that I think we can always look to with realtors is they are resilient people. They take full responsibility for their careers. They go to work every day not getting paid unless they do their job right and the deal closes. And so they're going to be able to work through many conditions going forward. I would just suggest that if you start with a base that makes sense, any riffs that you do on that should make sure to take into account the validity of the information and the data, the reliability and the trust that people can put into that. And again, the valuations that can be done with that information that we take for granted today.
I know. I especially coming from my position, my career has been based on the beautiful quality of good real estate data from every quarter of the state of Michigan. So it matters and it should be protected.
Well, I think it should exist.
Yes.
And again, I think there are rules and structures that evolved with realtors over the years, that, they say, the old saying, don't knock down a fence unless you know why it's there, that have served us to the point where we don't understand. I think there is a lot of great internet ideas that have come up over the years, that were great in the beginning because there's not a ton of people using them, and the information that goes on is reliable because everybody's using it. Mm-hmm. Because they see the value in it. And then over time, when data becomes old, it becomes more useless, or when it becomes manipulated. I'm thinking of restaurant type apps or whatever that might be. You go to a town and you want to see something near you and you go to a restaurant that's been closed for 2 years. That's not a good thing. Yeah. So it's going to be interesting with all the things that go on with AI and all of these things. They're all relying on good data, and I think there are rules surrounding good data that are well protected with one model that I know of, mm-hmm. And that is the traditional model as we know it. Now, again, what risk can occur? Improvement comes through change, so we'll see.
This is true. All right, another one. The term de-risking. So for those of you that aren't familiar with this de-risking term, this came from the National Association of Realtors in a response to the clear cooperation policies. They made the decision that they needed to de-risk. And so the decision making on how to enforce clear cooperation actually went down to the MLSs, which was an interesting move because there's the MLS, there's the association. It went to the MLSs. And from a personal standpoint, it felt a little bit, I feel like, a loss because I love this industry. I love what the last 100 years has put together. I value it. I see what it's done to the consumers. And then when you see the National Association of Realtors defer on important decisions to 350 different people that are going to decide or organizations that are going to decide, it's a little bit hard. And the Michigan Realtors, you're in an interesting position because you're this bridge. You're between the National Association of Realtors, you're between the local association and the practitioners. What is your perspective on this latest development?
Well, I'm really hoping it gets worked out. That would be one thing. Obviously, I've talked about our specialties, and again, there's been any number of people who've been frustrated by the idea, particularly at the local association level, that the state's going to come in and do a multi-list or something along those lines. We have no expertise in multi-lists. We don't pretend to have expertise in multi-lists in terms of running them or anything like that. It's the beauty of local associations, the three-way agreement, how they work with MLSs or don't. I understand the idea that you feel cut adrift, if I'm characterizing that correctly, by the idea that there isn't one place that's saying, okay, well, here's absolutely how it works, and this is how it's going to work, or we're going to toss you out. I would say that I think through this de-risking angle, I think, and Nakia Wright is doing a wonderful job, I think, in terms of taking a business look at an association model as she comes into play here after things really, a lot of sour taste in people's mouths after the Sitzer case and things of that nature that came through. De-risking makes sense from any business perspective in terms of if there is a huge target on your back on the basis that people hate realtors because they don't like to rely on other people, same way they hate lawyers or politicians or anything else who are representing them in some, where they lose some sense of personal power, that you're an easy target for lawsuits, even if they're not particularly relevant to a harm.
That might be true, but I would say that the founders of our real estate industry that created an open marketplace for buyers and sellers to transact real estate, they took a lot of risks. And when they made those risks, they had a beautiful reward.
Oh my gosh, that's a wonderful thing for you to say, and not me. But getting back to it, I can't help but believe that as we go through all these things and as we try to say, okay, what is the most stable base we can have that's already proven and even recently reinforced in Michigan courts about three-way agreement and MLS, all the things that go into the rulemaking surrounding what makes a real estate professional a realtor, the ethics involved, the duties involved, and the way that MLS has been created by those associations over the years, I can't help but think this is going to go full circle. That at some point there's someone's okay. Well, if we're throwing everything up in the air to see what shakes out, I think what'll shake out is the idea that data has to be put in responsibly and taken out responsibly and ethically, and that everybody has an agreed upon set of understanding of terms and conditions. I think those things have evolved locally. I go back to what I said at the beginning, which is what's going to make real estate survive going forward and realtors survive is hyper-locality, but working with an established and understood structure. And I think that's going to become more important as time goes on. I would add to what you were saying that I hope the de-risking perspective, which I think is very important at this juncture, given the successful lawsuit that was Sitzer, that frankly, I still don't understand the quote unquote harm involved, but we're all paying for it. But if the harm involved was I hired you to sell my house for a certain compensation, and that the house sold for what I wanted, and I give you the compensation that I agreed upon, what you do with that compensation, I don't understand how I don't understand how that's worth hundreds of millions of dollars over the nation. But that's just my personal lack of understanding there. If you can get sued for that and hit in present chaotic day, I think there's something to de-risking on to get our feet back under us at the national level, have an understanding of what the liabilities could and should not be, to now reiterate at the local level what we just did in the courts and other states have been doing regarding what makes the traditional real estate structure a public good that is good for the consumer. I think that the cream will rise and the de-risking motivation will be I hope, a somewhat temporary status in terms of somebody ultimately taking responsibility for something we can all agree is good for the public and good for the industry and good for homeownership in America, and move forward with it.
Well, I love that analysis. So thank you, Rob, for that.
That's a personal perspective. The views expressed on this show are in no way reflective of Michigan Realtors policies or board direction.
Good disclaimer. We'll run it across the bottom.
Yes. All right.
No. So we know that there are forces at play that impact our business. And you were giving the percentages that there's, 20 to 30% of the real estate practitioner population that knows what you do and appreciates it and values it. And another percentage that's aware of it. And then another percentage that they're just going about their business. But even if you're just going about your business, what's happening with policy, with taxes, with all of these different components matters. So for all of our real estate agents out there, what is one thing that they can do this month that'll actually help?
I would contact your local association or one of our field people, or look at our website and look at the legislation that is presently being considered in the legislature about housing affordability, about the tax, and I would familiarize yourself with what's being discussed, if for no other reason than to recognize that what is there. The third half, depending, that I was talking to you about that doesn't know we exist or is resentful of the idea they have to pay any kind of dues in life. They're generally new practitioners. I've heard in the past that we've talked about a third of our membership turns over every year. That's not, some of that is some people moving on. A lot of that people gave it a shot, didn't like it, moved on, and got out. They're looking for the first deal. They're looking to have they're looking to learn how to market and work and respond as a professional. They're working on their own parameters in their life in terms of what they're willing to do, in terms of the time spent with a client or how that works out. They've got a lot to work out before they can start to open their eyes to the bigger picture. I mean, you got to be in the business 3-5 years, something like that. I mean, unless you've got a broker who's really understands RPAC and wants to talk about right now, like why it's important that we give as a group towards a common goal, even though we have our own ideas about many other issues, and people we support or not support. But when we have realtor champions in legislature understand the importance of home ownership in the American experience, those are things that come with time and understanding. So what's the one thing I would say? Just pick an issue that seems like, oh, how's that work? And you'll learn a lot more about why there is taxation on certain things in the transactions that you may or may not have understood going in, what the duties are of local townships, cities, counties, in terms of where their areas of responsibility lie, because it's going to become very relevant to you in your business as you go forward to know who's responsible for the road out front, the fire, obviously, schools and all those things. You can get information on that, but all of those things are, you got to get past the idea that there are entities that aren't made up of people, or structures that have been created that were somehow either handed down from above or from below. The idea here is that it's always people trying to make their communities better. With that becomes a sense of, I think, of civic responsibility. Mm-hmm. With that becomes perhaps then running for office themselves, or working with their school board, or all those sorts of things that, it's always good to get your name out there, sure, but also have an understanding of what these entities are wrestling with. I think a good way to do it is just find an issue that you're thinking, okay, well, homeownership's expensive. What's on the table right now? Mm-hmm. And where does it come from? Does it come from statute, or does it come from county, or does it come from local? Those sorts of things. That would just be a nice little, it's like cracking a book. And those are some nice introductory things like, hey, there's this problem. I wonder how it's going to get solved. I think that's a good way to do it.
That's a great start. All right. So last one for you. 20 years from now, what do you hope people say Michigan Realtors did for housing and real estate practitioners that support it?
I hope they say that we promoted and endorsed solid public policies that were in the benefit of the people of the state of Michigan, and through extension, this country, on the basis that there were sober, thoughtful, realistic, market-aware, fiduciary, focused legislation that passed while I was here, mm-hmm. That put us in a solid position that people can take for granted going forward.
There we go. Well, thank you so much, Rob, for joining us. This has been a very fun conversation. It's great to get your perspective. For all of you listening and watching, we hope you enjoyed this episode. Please feel free to subscribe, share this, and for all of you, have a great real estate day.